Welcome back to the Geopolitical Pickle. As always, I'm your host, Ronan Wordsworth, with my friend and colleague Juan Free Munoz. How are you doing, Juan?
Pretty fine. Although so many years we know each other, you need to pronounce my surname properly.
It's Munoz.
Munoz. Yeah, you gotta add the ñ over there. I mean, to be fair, Wordsworth is also not easy to pronounce.
No, for the Czechs here where we are.
Not for the Czechs here. I don't know. How are you doing? All good?
All good from my end. And yourself?
Well, celebrating the Czech Republic winning the Hockey World Cup.
Exactly. It was a big party in the city for the first premiership in 14 years for the World Championships of ice hockey.
It would be interesting. Like, it's a World Cup where you have 12 teams, I think, or 12 or 16 teams. All of them are European except for the United States and Canada, because the other non-European country would be Kazakhstan. But as I was told this weekend, well, the west part of Kazakhstan is Europe, and it plays in the Champions League. So I was like, okay, fine. But yeah, everything good.
Well, today we're going to be talking a bit about some geopolitical issues that's been going on now in French overseas territory. So I want to go first into exactly what I'm talking about when I was saying a French overseas territory. Now, France and the UK, since the decolonization period, have still got control over a number of particularly smaller islands scattered across the globe. If we look at France, they've got overseas territories in New Caledonia, in French Polynesia, and then they've also got overseas domaceries, which are kind of different. They're administrative different. They're still seen as part of France, where the population has the right to vote in French elections, and they're basically just extensions of the French state, such as Réunion and Mayotte in the Indian Ocean, just off the coast of Africa. And then in the Caribbean, we've got places like Martinique, and then French Guiana on the South American mainland, and Guadeloupe, exactly. So there's this whole pile of regions and territories which are considered part of France. And then the second category is these overseas territories, which is New Caledonia, which is French Polynesia, which have some different level of governance internally. Why we're talking about it now, obviously, is that New Caledonia over the past few months has had increased agitation, and like there's been a lot of riots going out onto the streets. So do you want to tell us more about what's been happening there?
Yes, so since the 13th of May, demonstrations are erupted all over New Caledonia. New Caledonia is basically composed by the main island, Grande Terre, which is around 300 kilometers long. So this is like somehow bigger. And this is the island where most of the riots have been taking place. However, New Caledonia is also composed of smaller islands that are north and south of here. The demonstrations have turned into basically riots, burning down buildings, burning down police stations. The government in Paris declared the state of emergency and curfew, and sent over 3,000 security personnel to the island to try and curb down the spiral of violence. These demonstrations have not just been against rioters against the security forces, but there's also been like clashes between different groups. And basically right now, although it's a little bit more, I mean, it's not as its peak of violence as it was 2 weeks ago. We're recording this on the 27th of May. There is still clearly a problematic, and basically these riots were the spark that light these riots. It was a decision of the French Parliament to change the constitution and to basically allow French citizens that have been living in New Caledonia for more than 10 years to participate in the elections. Until now, they weren't allowed to participate.
Well, if we go back to the history of New Caledonia, obviously it was a colony of France. France was a great naval power, so they were able to acquire these colonies overseas. And then during decolonization, there was a lot of friction with the indigenous population there, I think. And
the Kanak.
The Kanak people, exactly. And so at the end, that resulted in New Caledonia being put on the list of the UN non-self-governing territories with a right to self-determination, which involves having a referendum within the country to determine if you want to be self-governing or not. Yeah, so the original vote in 1987 resulted in 98% of people deciding to remain part of France, basically, and be governed by France. But this still led to lots more friction, and there was basically ongoing riots like we see now in the late 90s, which led to the Noumea Accords. And as part of the Noumea Accords, there was 3 referendums agreed to be had. So you want to tell us about what happened with those 3?
Basically, well, in 1988, there was another accord to give, after this independence referendum that you've mentioned, there was another accord to give a little bit more autonomy to New Caledonia. And then in 1998, the Noumea Accord basically pacted this referendum of independence, that there were going to be 3 referendums of independence. It is true that then it was postponed, blah, blah, but the referendums took place in 2018, 2020, and 2021. So the basis of the referendum is that the people that can vote for the referendum are the people that were listed as citizens as residents of the island prior to 1998, and their descendants. In the referendum that took place in 2018, as we mentioned, there was around 54% of vote to remain within France. And in the one in 2020, it was a little bit lower. It was around 52%, the result to remain in France. What we can see here clearly is a division of the population. It is not the distance. We're talking about an island of 200,000 people, out of which can vote 150,000 or less. So we're talking about small, really small, like a really divided population. In 2021, there was the last referendum that was supposed to happen. However, due to the COVID restrictions and the situation in general that was happening, the independentist parties, they boycotted the election in light of what they perceived was a
unfair or rigged situation.
Yeah, rigged situation where they actually didn't have the capacity to run their campaigns. And therefore, they called for boycotting the election. They boycotted the election. 98% voted in favor of remaining, because 53%, I think, voted in the end. And this brings us to the situation now, where France wants to change this, and for this referendum to take place again, for example.
So my understanding is, while this legislation has now been passed by the French Parliament and the French Senate, and were to go into effect, which is supposed to at the end of this month, then that would open the voting roll to an additional 25,000 residents. And we're talking about, voting population of 150,000. And these 25,000 are seen to be all pro-France, because they're all generally all people that have come from France and immigrated to New Caledonia.
Yes, if you see even the results of the elections, we haven't mentioned it, but the population in New Caledonia, basically, like the demographics are around 40% are indigenous Karnak population. Then you have around 20% that are the French
European,
and then their descendants. And then you have other populations such as Vietnamese.
There's also got another 15%, which is mixed descendant, mixed European descent. So it could be European Kanak, European other Polynesian islands, basically from the region there.
Exactly. One of the problems is that, as you see, more or less the numbers, although I don't have the specific stat with me, more or less the number point out that the indigenous Karnak population tends to vote mostly to leave, whereas the French, the Europeans, and also the non-Europeans, but coming from other areas, maybe Polynesians no, but like the Vietnamese and so on, they clearly have to be voting. If they have the voting right, probably voting in favor of staying, just out of the raw results that we can get, more or less the numbers can align there.
And so if we look now, that's what's born about these riots coming to a head now, is because of the vote from the French Parliament, and maybe an act of desperation. They think that this was their last chance to be able to achieve independence from France.
I mean, physically, demographically speaking, if this law passes, for sure, if you add another 15% of the census that is pro-French, your chances of getting independence are 0 or no. I don't know.
Yeah.
How can you make it less than 0? But yeah, clearly the situation will get worse for the independence movement. That's for sure.
I just want to touch now on why New Caledonia might be important to France. So we say this position of New Caledonia for independence or not, but why would France want New Caledonia? So I mean, if we look at overseas territories that France have, New Caledonia is the largest, as you said, the largest island in the Pacific by some margin that they have. It's about 300 kilometers off the coast of Australia, so it's quite close in the Indo-Pacific to a lot of the Pacific islands there, and able to then project power into the Pacific Ocean.
Yes.
So if we think of the global powers at the moment, obviously the US is the global hegemonic power, and they're able to do that by being able to project their power outside their borders using their navy, which is a direct consequence of them having the most overseas naval bases with agreements with different countries spread out across the world. So then France, obviously, if they own this territory, if it's part of France, then that's automatically a given, I guess, that you can have this.
Of course, I mean, in the end, if you're having this territory that you can basically is a massive, if you want to transform it, it's a massive aircraft carrier that you have in the Pacific, beside an ally of yours, as is Australia, in a moment where there is clearly a pivot to the Pacific. Also, New Caledonia is on the trade route that connects basically Oceania with the United States. So it's also in the midway through, and for France is a position of benefit.
And also, I'd say like this region has become more geopolitically important over the last 3 or 4 years. If we see Chinese assertiveness in the South China Sea, has then been accentuated by their push into the Pacific. They obviously signed a defense agreement with the Solomon Islands in 2021, which allowed them to set up
It's north from
which is
New Caledonia.
exactly, it's New Caledonia's northern border. So then China is able to develop a naval base there, and so to lose New Caledonia as a French territory would diminish their ability to act in the region. But that's just the military and power projection side. Obviously, then there's secondarily the economic side. So I don't know if you go through.
I mean, in the economic side, the clearest thing that we can point out is that New Caledonia is the home of 1/4 of all the nickel reserves in the world, and they are the third largest producer, exporter. The problematic with nickel, we were mentioning before, is that it has actually not been profitable for decades.
I mean, I would say like nickel in general is vital for producing stainless steel, and it's growing in importance again in producing renewable energy sources such as solar panels. It'll be needed for electric cars and things like this. You need a lot of nickel, which is why we see Indonesia, for instance, ramping up. Indonesia is the biggest producer in the world, and they're ramping up massively in their mining capabilities. But they're better able to extract it cheaper. I think New Caledonia has a problem where their power cost to actually refine the nickel once you mine out the ore is quite high, and within the island there, then that makes the cost of the refined nickel product uncompetitive on the global markets, and meant the situation.
I think it's around 90% of their exports. Like 5% of their exports are refined nickel, of a specific kind of nickel.
Yeah,
it's kind of too. When I was reading about it, but 95% of what they export is raw nickel ore, basically, and then it has to be processed somewhere.
And you're not getting the value added of doing the refining process. I think what's important to note with New Caledonia nickel is it's actually a higher grade quality than everywhere else. But because of the increased cost, it's meant to the situation where the French state or French government intervention has had to subsidize the nickel production many years across the last 30 years to be able to keep the industry going. But the idea, I guess, then is that in the future, if the price of nickel ramps up massively, as we said, it's vital for a lot of renewable technologies and things like this. And projections say that it could be required up to 10 times more in the future than what's required right now. So if that's the case, then obviously the price can also go skyrocketing as well, and then it becomes profitable to produce this high-grade nickel within New Caledonia. I guess that's the argument from...
I think from the French is also... we have to talk also about the pride and the nationalistic perspective of France when we're talking about these matters. I think it's really, really important in that sense. For example, opening the door for one of these territories to leave or similar, it can open them a larger problem. And in a situation where they're already having struggled with their international stance, with their former colonies in Africa, even with their own allies, by AUKUS, for example, taking Australia out from a multi-billion-dollar deal with submarines that were produced in France and stuff like this. In a way, I think that to the economic part and to the geostrategic part that we can have, I think we also need to have in this sense an opportunity or a window of opportunity that Macron can see and be like, I'm gonna.
I mean, we've seen also France produce a new Indo-Pacific strategy in 2022, which New Caledonia is obviously a vital part of, and France has been wanting to get very much more involved in the Indo-Pacific region. As you said, AUKUS has obviously put a new focus onto the region, and France is kind of like, we're here too. This is where we've got investment in the region, so they want to maintain a presence. And I think that is accentuated by or best demonstrated by the fact that Macron went straight to New Caledonia for emergency. It's on a big island.
It's the second time that he's got to go. He already had to go in December 2022 because there were also riots in this sense. And I think we have to highlight that too in order to understand a little bit what comes later. Because France has claimed that there is a foreign interference here and that this has been motivated by some foreign interference. And when we point out that, I mean, the reality of the situation in the ground, it happens in many of these overseas territories of France. Or at least this is what they claim their citizens, is that the residents, is that the situation, the benefits that they may get for being French are not being seen there, that they have less access to the job market, that in general, they living in a worse economic condition. That
if they were to leave France.
Yes, that within having this status, they have a worse economic, socioeconomic condition that they have in France, and like they basically they're being discriminated against
or marginalized
from getting access to even sources of financing that France may have and so on. So this is a grievance that is real, and and you go statistically, it is real that there's problematics in all these territories. Now, it is true that France has claimed that this comes from outside too. And there are the usual suspects, Russia and China, in this sense. Russia, we were talking about nickel. Russia was expelled from the UK and the US market of nickel. So the price rose a little bit, and now they agreed with China in creating some joint ventures on nickel exploitation. So like there was some maybe some road to get from there, like yes, maybe there may have been some sort of influence, but
because also that will have a ripple effect of increasing the price of nickel as well.
Exactly.
With Russia being shut out by sanctions of providing nickel to a lot of the world, the Russian nickel might become cheaper, but then maybe conversely the other nickel becomes more expensive. Or
yes, I mean, basically, I think this is more of I think this was a claim given because we know that Russia is launching misinformation campaigns all over Western countries, or like anti-Western, and specifically France has been hit by this several times and arguably lost against this misinformation campaign in a couple places. So probably, usual suspect, you go and ask for this. China, of course, as we were saying, the Solomon Islands, which are just on the north of Solomon Island, just on the north of New Caledonia, signed the defense agreement with China recently.
And China's obviously already made a play at signing similar pact with Papua New Guinea, for instance, which has brought Papua New Guinea back into the fore for US and Australian strategic thinking. I mean, President Joe Biden was supposed to visit Papua New Guinea last year, which he had to rush home because of debt ceiling issues in the US, but that demonstrates like the increased importance that they even saw with trying to fix this relationship with Papua New Guinea to prevent more Chinese influence across the region. And I think Australia also has now pumped in billions of dollars over the next 5 years into Papua New Guinea and some of the Pacific islands, such as Tuvalu, such as Vanuatu, like neighbors of New Caledonia, to try and safeguard them for future against potential Chinese influence and basically the same fate as what happened to Solomon Islands and happening to them, because it's definitely not in Australia's strategic interest to have a lot of Chinese naval vessels right on our doorstep. I think we see the Pacific from Australian perspective. I think people like to go on holidays there on these islands, but it's like then if you have these naval ships right on your doorstep, then it's a real tangible threat to your security?
A meme came to mind. I don't know if you know this meme of like Hank from Breaking Bad, where he's like going on holidays, smiling, all good. Chinese coming. I mean, it would be interesting. For example, we could do an episode because I find Pacific geopolitics particularly interesting because of how weak in the international arena all these places are.
Or how oversized maybe the discourse around them is compared to their size and population.
It's also because most of these islands on their own, they have massive problematics to survive in the world system, for example, in the global system that we live in, because basically they receive tourists, but the population doesn't have access to, for example, cheap flights to get them other places. They don't have any resources.
Or any industry, or as we said, like another... Well, Tuvalu, for instance, will be the first country that is going to be climate migrants, they say. So, I mean, they're definitely a problem for the region. And I think then that's all compounded, like to build industries there, you need access to cheap power. And then on these small islands in the Pacific, it's very difficult to produce cheap power sources. So it's going to be an ongoing problem. It's always power costs a lot. So industrialization is difficult to do without cheap access to electricity. And then the problem keeps going from there. Just speaking of foreign powers, I think I'd like to touch on like one. So I'll start with like what the French Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin.
Gerald Darmanin.
Darmanin. Okay.
Well, parts of French.
So I'll start with what French Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin accused Azerbaijan of direct involvement with these separatist forces. And I mean, that seems like a very random association. Like, why is a country in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, getting involved in the independence movement and riots in New Caledonia? It seems very far away. So I wanted to give you a bit of background. What could potentially be driving that?
So what is clear, first of all, the connection between the current riots and Azerbaijan has not been proven. This is what the French government has said. Now,
Azerbaijan has denied it.
Azerbaijan has denied it, and like I still find it incredible to find a country of the Caucasus meddling with the French interest in the Pacific. If it happens, just to screw the French. In any case, what is the reality? The reality is that, there is this group that was created recently, which is called the Baku Initiative Group. This group basically gathers...
It gathers separatist leaders from...
It gathers separatists, well, not even only separatists, but it gathers like presidents of French territories of Ultramer and like the departments of Ultramer and all of these. Like they're all gathered. French Polynesia, Corsica, French Guyana, Guadeloupe, Martinique, New Caledonia. They're all gathered there to discuss basically decolonization and independence from France and whatever. This is an initiative sponsored by the government in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan may not be the richest country in the world, but they are a population of, so I was reading today, they have a population of 10 million, and they produce 1 million barrels of oil a day. So they can fuel this.
Exactly. They've got money. They don't have necessarily political clout or ability to reach outside their country other than that, but to be able to then fund maybe some of these, I say separatist groups because they specifically targeted like leaders of indigenous populations that were pro-independence from France in the meeting that they brought them all together last year in October, I believe, which looks like it was designed to try and say, you'll get some financial backing from us.
Yeah.
That's just how the appearance of it definitely speaks to that you get some financial backing for us if you then start causing issues or
why did Azerbaijan do this though?
I mean, so that's very interesting actually. If we look, Azerbaijan and Armenia have obviously had an ongoing conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, which has been decades long, and France has always been a very big supporter of Armenia. Armenia is the weaker of the two countries. It's got a smaller population. It's got a much, much smaller economy. And so France is also home to a lot of Armenian expats and refugees that have come over the decades, I think, and have settled in France. So they're very much pro-Armenia. And just with the Nagorno-Karabakh war being kind of settled at the end of last year, then France was kind of critical of the way Azerbaijan took back the region from Armenia and is basically bullied them out of the position there, and has.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's like a bit of tit for tat. So now Azerbaijan, annoyed with French involvement and support for Armenia, is now trying to get back at them by supporting these pro-independence movements within French overseas territories, which then have the power. Obviously, we see it. Macron has now had to disrupt his schedule for weeks. We've seen like thousands of the troops having to be deployed to New Caledonia. I think the latest count was 3,500 military troops and security forces, police officers, and the like, being deployed to the island to contain the unrest. So I think they say, okay, what can we do? We've got money, we can support these groups, and it's kind of a low risk strategy. You can also then have plausible deniability if you comes back to you say, oh, we support these groups' movement, but we didn't have any involvement.
We weren't involved in this.
But I thought it was fascinating as well to see the rioters on the street waving the New Caledonian flag in one hand and the Azerbaijan flag in the other.
That's probably one of the images of 2024. Like New Caledonian flag beside the Azerbaijani flag.
Which is, I think, it at first glance it makes no sense why they're connected. But then you dig a bit deeper, you say, okay, this is definitely seems part of the strategy from Baku from Baku Initiative Group to try and sow this discontent and potentially then provide an opening. And if we think back to like where Azerbaijan is and its historical allies, Azerbaijan is a very close ally of Russia. The Azerbaijani state is quite authoritarian. They've been supported from Moscow in terms of cheap power, in terms of like a lot of things.
Yeah, but at the same time, for example, Azerbaijan right now is pretty close to the European Union.
They have
because of energy matters, basically, because they can provide oil and they can provide gas.
Especially while the EU has been looking for alternative sources after cutting off a lot of the Russian oil and gas coming into the union. So they've looked to alternative sources such as Azerbaijan, which has been very willing to supply it. But I mean, that comes with money as well, and that money then could be used for other activities if needed.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, it's again, like for me, one of the images of 2024 is a New Caledonian flag beside an Azerbaijani flag, because I think like it's really
it's iconic now.
It shows you the power of soft power too, and like how can you reach the end of the world?
Definitely.
Without necessarily being there and without necessarily sponsoring it, you just host a couple meetings.
And for now, it looks like the riots are kind of dying down. Obviously, the security forces have got control over the country again. And going forward, then I see like this legislation will eventually pass. And I think for France, they want to maintain these overseas territories as part of France. I think are too vital to their strategic interests.
But they will probably need to reach a different agreement, or reach an agreement that guarantees a certain percentage of votes, for example, a certain percentage of the local parliament to the indigenous population or stuff like this. In my opinion, they do need to go to an agreement, and they are like right now they are sitting down and they are negotiating these things.
Yep.
Because it is also it is not even just a problem of France against the French, like the metropole Paris against Noumea, which is the capital. By the way, we didn't mention it. It is also a civil problem because there is a lot of the population is really divided. So it can
definitely something that needs to be fixed going forward so that the population can live in harmony even on the island itself. But yeah, it's an interesting developing situation. I think we'll see how it ends up from here. But I think it's good to touch on these overseas territories, because obviously we went through a lot of France's overseas territories, and the UK obviously still has a lot of similar little islands scattered across the globe that are still considered British overseas territories. So maybe we'll post up a map. Yeah, we definitely can post some maps about the British and the French and the Spanish. You've got a few.
We hope that you enjoyed the episode. Again, if you like it, if you have any comments, just please let us know your review. And yeah, this is all from me.
It's all from me too. So thanks for listening to Geopolitical Pickle. We'll catch you next time. I'm Ronan.
I am Juanfrey. Ciao, ciao.
The Geopolitical Pickle is created by Ronan Wordsworth and Juan Francisco Muñoz. Follow us on Instagram at The Geopolitical Pickle or Twitter at The Geopickle for more content, and follow us on every podcast platform.